again continuing our coverage 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, on the coronavirus, the CCP virus, particularly focused on what's really happening in China. Of course, I'm here again filming from my home in Queens, New York. Temporary arrangement. We'll have to see what we do after this. But let's jump into it. So first, we're going to talk about what's happening in Wuhan, the epicenter of the virus. You may remember April 8th, the Chinese Communist Party opened up Wuhan. Before we get started, folks, if you haven't liked and subscribed, please do. We really need your support. Also, if you're on YouTube, click the notification bell. So authorities lifted the restrictions on Wuhan, at least to an extent, on April 8th. But locals in Wuhan are telling a different story. They're saying that basically the Chinese Communist Party made it so people could travel out of Wuhan to go work. But for people living in Wuhan, the restrictions are still in place. They're still having infections. And that when infections happen in residential compounds, the entire compound is locked down. Now we have some interviews on the ground from people in Wuhan. Of course, Epoch Times is proudly blacklisted in China. That's what happens when you report the truth on China. Of course, we have editions in Hong Kong and in Taiwan, but in the mainland we cannot get into it. But we're able to get sources there. We're able to get interviews there, and several people in Wuhan gave us interesting information on what's really happening. Now, this is from Epoch Times. It says, quote, Mr. Gao, an individual who we interviewed, said that the unblocking of Wuhan is mainly for people who want to leave Wuhan and leave Hubei, which is the province that Wuhan is in, to work. So the life of the people who originally lived in Wuhan has not changed. In other words, the situation for them has not changed since the Chinese Communist Party reopened Wuhan, quote unquote, on April 8th. It continues, don't go out at home. Even if you don't go out, you have to take your temperature and brush your health code. In other words, show your health code on your smartphone. Your smartphone is not just your phone. Your smartphone is tied to your bank account, it's tied to your social security number, and as things currently stand in China, it's tied to your health code. If you have a green health code, you can travel. If you have a red health code, you cannot travel. Again, this emphasizes why it was such a big deal when, again, 21 million cell phone accounts just suddenly disappeared in China at a time when they're usually rising, and at a time when, because of the way the Chinese Communist Party is running a lot of things, for example, the schools, students need cell phone accounts to log into their online classes. You would have expected the cell phone numbers to go up, not down. 21 million fewer. But again, he's referring to the fact that if you go out, you have to take your temperature, you have to show your health code on your cell phone. It says that you have to prove that you were healthy before you can come in and go out in the community. He said there is no unblocking of Wuhan. Wuhan is still very much closed down unless you work out of town. Now continuing, while the coronavirus, the CCP virus, is continuing its spread in China, while it was at its peak, the Chinese Communist Party was still carrying out human rights abuses. Now, of course, they persecute Muslim Uyghurs, they persecute Tibetans, they persecute house Christians, tearing down their churches. We've had reports again of the Muslim Uyghurs being used for slave labor during this time. Today we have a story about Falun Gong. In March, there were 747 documented cases of Falun Gong practitioners who were abducted or harassed for practicing their beliefs. Falun Gong is like Chinese yoga, I guess you could think of it. It's Qigong, similar to Tai Chi. So Chinese people doing slow movements in the parks in the morning and holding themselves to a higher moral standard of truthfulness, compassion, tolerance, trying to be good people. Communist Party declared it a threat to the atheistic rule of the Communist Party back in 1999 and decided to wipe it out. 70 million to 100 million people tortured, killed, arrested, re-education through labor, using as living sources for forced organ transplants, you name it. This is continuing as we speak. And also on that note, the Epoch Times received another leaked document from the 610 office. You may remember one of our recent episodes, we talked about how we received another leaked document from the 610 office. The 610 office is like the Chinese Gestapo. It's an extrajudicial law enforcement agency that's able to basically override even governments, even local governments. And it was created specifically under the time of Jiang Zemin, former head of the Chinese Communist Party 2 leaders ago, to persecute Falun Gong. Now, it's interesting, this document, it shows that this department, the 610 department, still has powers that override the party and the government at the same level as it is. And it can even directly engage in foreign affairs, according to these documents. It can go abroad and carry out, quote, diplomatic affairs against Falun Gong abroad. In other words, the Chinese Communist Party is able to use this department to export its persecution and its suppression of a religious group, people who practice, Chinese yoga overseas, outside of China. Now, Xi Jinping had reorganized and fired many people in the 610 department, but this document shows that even after that, it has remained fully functional. It also shows that the 610 office in Fangshan district can assess party and government departments at the same level and determine whether local governments are carrying out the human rights abuses of the party. And again, this follows on the other leaked document we had from the 610 office just recently, last week in fact, which showed what they get paid. They get paid about 200,000 yuan a year, which is a lot in China. 100,000 yuan a year is a lot of money. 200,000 is a whole lot. And the document notably had names of individuals who are working for the department. I mentioned the Epoch Times will be looking into these individuals, seeing whether they have engaged in human rights abuses. Now, moving on, the Chinese regime is attempting to get local government officials outside of China to promote its propaganda. And there's actually been a backlash against it. Wisconsin Senate President Roger Roth said that he received two emails from an official in the Chinese consulate in Chicago, and he was asked to pass a resolution that promotes the Chinese Communist Party's handling of the Wuhan virus, this coronavirus. And they even provided him with a draft of the resolution, which he made public. He exposed it. Now, instead, of course, Roth introduced a resolution that did the opposite. He condemned the Chinese Communist Party for its actions. He exposed their attempts to influence him, and he released their letter. We'll read some of that now. Now, the Chinese Communist Party's resolution included lines such as, quote, "Whereas China has been transparent and quick in sharing key information of the virus with the WHO and the international community, thus creating a window of opportunity for other countries to make timely response." And of course, that's the very opposite of what the Chinese Communist Party is being accused of doing by most governments in the world, even including Iran at this point, which is one of China's few allies, close allies. As we remember, the Chinese Communist Party suppressed information on the virus, continues to suppress information on the virus. The WHO has been their sock puppet, repeating everything they want to say. It's just a hand and a puppet. That's all they've been so far, and that's what they're being accused of being. And of course, Roth called them out on this, and he also on their human rights abuses. Now, he said in his resolution, whereas the Chinese people are a great people and heirs to one of the greatest civilizations in human history, held hostage by a brutal and oppressive regime these past 70 years. And whereas the Communist Party of China has engaged a continued pattern of human and natural rights abuses perpetuated by the country's communist administration, including the Communist Party's treatment of Tibet, the internment and re-education, quote-unquote, of 1.5 million Muslim Uyghurs in concentration camps, the enactment of a one-child policy responsible for aborting hundreds of millions of children, forced abortion, the majority of them female, a record of organ harvesting and forced sterilization, crackdown on the Tiananmen protests, and restrictions on individual expression and religious practice. And he goes on to explain how the Chinese Communist Party covered up the virus, how it suppressed information, how it arrested individuals who tried warning the world, and how that led to the world being unprepared for this virus. And what's interesting about this especially is a similar case took place in Germany. Now get this, News 18 reports, citing Germany's Die Welt. I'm probably saying that wrong, you'd forgive me. They say that, quote, senior officials and staff at German government ministries were invited to, quote, speak in positive terms about China's management of the coronavirus. And also says, quote, the foreign ministry recommended that all German governmental departments reject such approaches. Of course, this is part of a larger propaganda push of the Chinese Communist Party right now. Actually, the Wall Street Journal reported on April 10th that the CCP has been buying ads on social media platforms, including Facebook. And these are promoting English stories from its state-run news outlets, which are now declared as foreign missions of the Chinese Communist Party, at least 5 of them are. And it says that these posts, quote, in some cases disparage U.S. efforts to fight the global pandemic. And of course, as we speak right now, this issue is becoming an election issue. President Trump is being criticized by many for his handling of the virus. Many of the big news outlets have been attacking him for this. And so is this not an example of the Chinese Communist Party interfering in our upcoming 2020 elections? We'll have to see if that is determined as the case. And of course, Facebook accepting money from state-run Chinese news outlets to promote that. And of course, this is in addition to, as we mentioned before, the Chinese Communist Party sending an open letter to 230 far-left parties in over 100 countries for, quote, coordinating policies and, quote, mobilizing of resources and forces globally. Now, on the note of Chinese Communist Party influence operations, you may remember this Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson who was going on Twitter and claiming that the virus actually came from the United States, not from China. And of course was attacked by it. The Chinese Communist Party at the time was pushing very hard that narrative. Allegedly, behind closed doors, Trump had a phone call with Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party. Xi agreed to back down, and suddenly the Chinese Communist Party's narrative on that seemed to have disappeared. Meanwhile, this Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson made no public appearances for a good long while, and then finally reappeared just recently. And when he was asked about his tweet, he claimed that was his own statement, his own opinion. And of course now he's pushing the Chinese Communist Party's current narrative, which is that the United States and China should work together. Well, guess what? He tweeted again that anyone can go to China, talk to anybody, and enjoy freedom. And FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr responded to him on Twitter and said that he would like to speak with the different Chinese journalists, citizen journalists, doctors who were arrested, persecuted by the Chinese Communist Party for trying to warn the world about the virus. Of course, different cases, about 8 Chinese doctors in China were suppressed, originally back in December, for trying to warn the world about the virus, one of whom was arrested and later died of the virus. And of course, the Chinese Communist Party has arrested at least 3 different citizen journalists. Some of the viral videos showing bodies in China came from them. They have disappeared. And so FCC Commissioner Carr said he'd like to speak with these individuals. And of course, the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson did not respond to that, but he did continue by posting some articles on Twitter that smear the United States. And now, on the note of this FCC chair, he actually spoke on the Sarah Carter Show on April 13th, saying the United States is going to launch a full investigation into China Telecom for alleged espionage. This is a quote from Sarah Carter's website. It says that the FCC is now conducting a top-to-bottom review of every single Chinese company operating in the United States telecommunications networks. And of course, this follows a Department of Justice statement from last week, which we'll link also in the description. Folks who are following want to see the links. We have every day the source links. Now, there's too many of them to just publish into the description, so we have a Google Doc where we put them. You can go read them there. But the Department of Justice had a statement on April 9th recommending the FCC, quote, evoke and terminate China Telecom Corp's authorizations to provide international telecommunications services to and from the United States. Of course, this follows other U.S. actions against Chinese telecom company Huawei. Now for some news from outside of China. Now, you may remember we talked about these black Africans in China who are being sent out on the streets right now. They say they have no place to stay, no food. Long story short, rumors were circulating on the Chinese internet claiming that the virus was coming from these black Africans. Many of them were evicted from their homes. Many of them, some of whom spoke with Epoch Times, said they have no place to stay, no food, and they're very concerned about their situations. African diplomats in China wrote to the Chinese regime and asked what's going on, asked to clarify. Now in Nigeria, doctors are rejecting the country's original plans to invite the Chinese medical team. China is, of course, also denying any discrimination against its, quote, African brothers. And of course, there's a petition now calling for WHO boss Tedros to resign. Of course, the WHO has been, the whole way through, just parroting everything the Chinese Communist Party says. They're being called out for it internationally. And of course, it's raising serious questions of the integrity of the WHO and the reliability of its director, Tedros. And there's a petition now calling for his resignation that is at close to 1 million signatures. Meanwhile, the WHO is saying that 70 coronavirus vaccines are currently in development. There's a race not just among countries, but also among pharmaceutical companies to develop this vaccine. We'll see whether they can do it or not. They've been trying to develop vaccines for coronaviruses and the flu since at least the 1970s. And of course, they have a pseudo-flu vaccine that you have to get every year, so we'll see how that goes. Meanwhile, New York City hospitals are saying they are, quote, days away from running out of coronavirus test swabs. And of course, this follows other cases where we noted before that they're saying that many people are dying in their homes and their bodies are not being tested to see if they died from the virus. Apparently, they're lacking the ability to test all the people who are dying from it. Now, South Korea is stepping up to the plate. It's going to ship coronavirus test kits to the United States, according to Reuters. Canada, meanwhile, has developed a quick, portable COVID-19 test kit that was just approved for use. And actually, on the note of different medical equipment being shipped abroad to the United States, Vietnam is going to ship 450,000 protective suits to the United States. And of course, the broader context of this is that the Chinese Communist Party has been conducting what we would call mask diplomacy. It is holding the world's protective gear, medical gear, hostage, essentially, shipping it selectively to countries that are favorable of it. In some cases, such as with France, even saying that they will only ship its equipment if they agree to install Huawei 5G networks. And of course, many of the medical packages, different garbs, different masks being sent abroad, even the test kits from China are found to be non-functional. We mentioned before Spain and Czech Republic noted that only about 70 to 80, well, roughly between 70% and 80% of these virus test kits from China are non-functional. And meanwhile, Smithfield's is shutting down its U.S. pork plants indefinitely. And it is warning that there may be meat shortages in the United States. And there's some interesting information about Smithfield's we'll get into. Now, Smithfield's produces about 4% to 5% of pork production in the United States. And of course, Smithfield Foods, for those of you who don't remember, back in 2013, was sold to a Chinese company. That was Shanghai International Holdings. And it was the largest acquisition ever of a U.S. company by a Chinese company. In November 2019, also as broader context on this, notably when this virus was spreading in China, at least the original first case known, Reuters quoted Smithfield staff, local officials, and industry sources saying that Smithfield Foods was shipping U.S. pork to China. And so we'll leave that here for today. Now, folks, again, we broadcast 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, so please tune in. We're going to be covering heavily the coronavirus, the CCP virus. If you haven't already, please remember to like and subscribe. We really need your support. And of course, folks, if you have any questions, any statements, anything you'd like to send me, leave it in the comments section below. I do read the comments. And every Monday I'll be going over some of the comments on the show. And of course, really appreciate you all being here. Really appreciate your support. See you next time.